All right, welcome to our Bible study tonight. I apologize, I'm starting just a little bit late, well, more than a little, compared to what we've actually been starting on time lately. But I'm having some problems with my sinuses, making it hard for me to get anything actually done today. And I was trying to get the little robot voice that reads my evidences for me to cooperate, and he did not want to cooperate. As well as we did get the printer issue resolved. I forgot that we had an extra printer hidden away in storage that had belonged to Lori. We were able to get that, get it out, get it situated. And so I was able to print the bulletins already for tomorrow. So I appreciate I had multiple volunteers who wanted to help with that. We were able to get it done, though. And so we're going to get into our study tonight. That's what I'm looking forward to. I hope everybody's doing well. I'm glad to see already several comments. Didn't have a chance to read them. I assume that there's good stuff being talked about while I was running behind. But thank you for being here to be a part of the study with us. So, of course, we're going to start off in Revelation chapter 11, since that is the primary passage where we learn about these two witnesses. It's not the only passage. The truth is we could probably bounce around quite a bit more. However, I'm mostly going to stay in Revelation 11 and then some Old Testament prophecy that is very relevant to Revelation chapter 11. So just bear that in mind, that there's a lot more passages. It's not just like there's only, this is the only passage in which you learn about these people. Because we this time decided to narrow our view a little bit by keeping the question specifically to this. Are the two witnesses Moses and Elijah? And I did it that way so that I don't have to get into like a deep study of the specific period in the tribulation when they are, and because there's a lot of stuff attached to them. And to be honest, it's more than I can get into one study, I think, because even tonight, I think we're going to be pushing it to get everything in. So I tried to keep it narrowed down to a specific subject, and that specific subject is are the two witnesses Moses and Elijah? So of course, since we're asking the question, I'll give you my hypothesis up front. If you're not familiar with the format, I will spend the rest of this study trying to explain to you scientifically, biblically, logically, why I've come to this conclusion. Of course, the biblically is the main emphasis, but I treat this almost as a science experiment where we come up with there's a question, and hypothesis is given. We give the evidences and explain, through the Bible why we believe this, and then in the end, you're invited to give your grade as to whether you were convinced or not. So, with that in mind, the answer I will be giving up front is that I do believe, yes, there are two possible ways in which you can interpret the passage, and I'll show you why both of them are, to be honest, acceptable, and I'll show you why I believe that they are actually Moses and Elijah, not just somebody coming in the spirit or power like John the Baptist did. Now, I will actually defend if somebody leans towards just spirit and power, not actually Moses and Elijah. And I'll defend that because I do see biblically, I could very easily make that argument. It's one of those things I was hoping that I could come with a definitive yes or no on this. And I'll be honest, even for myself, I could still defend, even though I lean one direction, I could defend the other one just as well. So this is one of those places, if you disagree with me, don't worry. You're going to agree with most of what I say, even if you think they just come in the spirit and power. It's just going to be as we get closer to the end, maybe there'll be a few points that you disagree on. But we'll see as we go through it. Hopefully I'm able to help you understand a little better. Let's read about them, and then I'll address a few things. So Revelation 11, verse 3 says, "And I will give power unto my two witnesses, and they shall prophesy 1,260 days, clothed in sackcloth. These are the two olive trees and the two candlesticks standing before the God of the earth. And if any man will hurt them, fire proceedeth out of their mouth, and devoureth their enemies. And if any man will hurt them, he must in this manner be killed. These have the power to shut heaven, that it rain not in the days of their prophecy, and have power over waters to turn them to blood, and to smite the earth with all plagues as often as they will. And when they shall have finished their testimony, the beast that ascendeth out of the bottomless pit shall make war against them, and shall overcome them and kill them. And their dead bodies shall lie in the streets of the great city, which spiritually is called Sodom and Egypt, where also the Lord was crucified. And they of the people and kindreds and tongues and nations shall see their dead bodies 3 days and a half, and shall not suffer their dead bodies to be put in graves. And they that dwell upon the earth shall rejoice over them and make merry, and shall send gifts one to another, because these two prophets tormented them that dwelt on the earth. And after 3 days and a half, the spirit of life from God entered into them, and they stood upon their feet, and great fear fell upon them which saw them. And they heard a great voice from heaven saying unto them, Come up hither. And they ascended up to heaven in a cloud, and their enemies beheld them. And the same hour there was a great earthquake, and the 10th part of the city fell. And in the earthquake were slain of men 7,000, and the remnant were affrighted, and gave glory to glory to the God of heaven. So if you're not familiar with these characters and what's going on in the story, let me give you a quick run through of them. That I believe, because of the fact that we're given the exact number of days that they will prophesy, and it's 360, which prophetic years is exactly, or I'm sorry, based off of 360 days of prophetic years, it's exactly 3.5 years. I believe that they'll have to be doing this in the first 3.5 years. It also makes sense to me in the timeline of the tribulation that the Antichrist is going to come in and kill them at the same time that he's coming into Jerusalem and going to go offer the sacrifice there in the temple and declare himself to be God and so forth. It just makes sense that it all lines up, and that's also when he really begins his persecution of the Jews who won't follow him. I'm not going to definitely not argue that tonight. I mean, if I'm teaching a lesson on that, I might argue a little more on that if somebody disagrees. But for tonight, you're welcome to lean whichever way you want on whether it's the first 3.5 or last 3.5. However, I'll note this: if it's the last 3.5, that whole thing of them making men everywhere and afraid when they raise from the dead 3.5 days later doesn't really make much sense, since God specifically notes that it's exactly the number of days necessary to fill out 3.5 years. Whereas if it's the first 3.5 and then 3.5 days into the Great Tribulation, they rise up. That makes more sense. Their effect on the world is so profound that when they die, people rejoice. People are excited. They praise the Antichrist for killing them. Because they even send gifts to people and celebrate because they hate these preachers. So their message is something that the world despises. They hate this. So that, of course, we know they're pointing people to Christ, and this is in the period of the tribulation when people hate that. So that shouldn't surprise us either. So as we are looking at them, they come in, they preach. They're going to preach for 3.5 years. There's some notable characteristics we're going to get into in a moment. They're going to be killed. They're going to raise from the dead. They're going to ascend to heaven. Earthquake's going to happen, and the portion of Israel that's left surviving this earthquake, that remnant that's described, is going to fear God. And we know, based off other prophecies, they're going to turn to God in that period. So now, saying all of that, let's get into the actual subject tonight. Are they Moses and Elijah? Now, let me throw this out up front. If you, for some reason, believe that they're Moses and Enoch, I'm just going to be honest with you. You don't have a good Bible reason to believe that. Unless you have something that nobody has ever said that I've ever heard in all the commentaries and multiple college courses and books and all that I've read on this. Maybe you've got something that nobody else has. But as far as I'm aware, I've never got a good Bible reason why anybody believes that. It really just comes down to a few little things about Enoch that are taken out of context or completely misunderstood. And to be honest, it's mostly around the idea of Elijah being called up into the air and Enoch being a was not. Whereas in reality, there are multiple Old Testament prophecies that point to Moses and Elijah. So that this does have to be either someone coming in the spirit and power of Moses and Elijah, or it has to be literally Moses and Elijah. Now, the thing that I see up front is we have to look at what this tells us about them and what Old Testament prophecy tells us about them. And then we can start making an opinion of whether it's in the spirit and power or literally them. And so for this, let's go ahead and look at our passage. We'll take it verse by verse for a little bit and try to break it down. So verse number 4 says, "These are the 2 olive trees and the 2 candlesticks standing before the God of the earth." So, of course, proper Bible study would be to look at that and see when other When other point in the Bible is God talking about two candlesticks or two olive trees? Now, the olive trees is a very specific reference to a prophecy that is very clear. We'll go to it in just a moment, Zechariah. Candlesticks, you could debate a little bit, but there is a precedent already set in the book of Revelation as to what the candlestick should represent. And I'm going to say this because there is potential for confusion, because in the prophecy about the two olive trees, there is a candle mentioned that has 7 branches and a bowl, but that is very much something we already know what it is, and it's definitely not them. And so we'll get into that as well as we go back into the prophecy in Zechariah in a moment. But as far as just individual candlesticks, not a something like a menorah type thing, or I'm using the right word for that, wherein you have the branches coming out of, in this case, 7 branches as opposed to the 6. But as you have this thing where you have 7 branches coming and each one having a bulb, if you've actually paid attention when studying the decorations of the temple and the tabernacle and so forth, there was an object like that there. All of those things have a heavenly equivalent, and so we'll get into that in a moment. But as far as a candlestick all by itself, they're in Revelation. There already is, he's referencing something from the book we're reading. And in fact, it's Revelation 1, verse 20, where we're told that the candlestick of each of those 7 churches is the messenger or the angel. Understand, angel is a word that means literally messenger, and many times in the Bible is used to talk about a human or a preacher or anything of that nature, almost as much as what it is to use to talk about what we think of when we say angel, which are the cherubim and the seraphim. That would be their actual proper species name. When you say angel, you're referring to their job. And so, it'd be like calling every mailman as if he was his own species because he's a mailman. It's they're humans. They're just mailman as their job. In the case of the cherubim, seraphim, you see them acting as angels or messengers. And in the case of preachers, you see that as well. So as far as this idea, what we're looking at here with the candlesticks, I guess the easiest thing to take away from that is we're being told that they're 2 preachers. They're 2 messengers. They're 2, as the passage itself refers to them, they're prophets. Now, when it comes to the 2 olive trees, we have to go back to Zechariah for that. And let me give a quick greetings to Brother Daniel Custer. It's a good friend of mine. I haven't got to talk to in a while, and I see he's watching. So I give my greetings to you, Brother Custer. And of course, there's other people I probably should be giving greetings to as well. I just haven't talked to you for a while. So Revelation 11, I'm sorry, not Revelation 11, Zechariah 4, Zechariah chapter number 4, verse number 1 is where we're going to get into this prophecy about the 2 olive trees. And it's very clear that it's talking about them. We'll see that in a moment. Zechariah 4 and verse 1, it says, "And the angel talked with me, that talked with me came again and waked me as a man that is wakened out of his sleep, and said unto me, What seest thou? And I said, I have looked, and behold, a candlestick of all of gold, with a bowl upon the top of it, and his 7 lamps thereon, and 7 pipes to the 7 lamps which are upon the top thereof, and the 2 olive trees by it, one on the right side of the bowl, and the other on the left side thereof." So we have a scene being described to us where you have, and you have to understand a little bit about what's going on in Zechariah. They're dealing with this idea of reconstructing in the temple, and in the prophecies concerning reconstructing the temple, there's, I guess, to be honest, there's like a question of physical things that are being made. What is the spiritual, what is the spiritual significance of this? And the prophecy, in a lot of ways, is helping us understand certain things that are there, and what are they? What is the spiritual significance? Because what he's describing is something that physically exists inside the temple. When you read about it, you go back, you'll find it. I don't think I wrote down the passages for it here, but I mean, if you were to just type in olive trees or any of that stuff, then you'll find that this object is described. If you were to type in candlesticks, I guess would be the best thing to type in. If you were typing candlestick, you would find this object being this candlestick with the 7 branches being described there in the temple and so forth. So it's an object that's there. However, like everything else, like the cherubims and so on, the Ark of the Covenant representing the throne of God and the 4 living creatures around it, like the sea of glass and the brazen bowl and so forth, everything has a heavenly equivalent there in the tabernacles. And we're getting ready to get into that part of our study in Hebrews now, where the attention is being drawn to that, to those parallels between the heavenly and the earthly tabernacle there. But as we're looking at this, the questions being asked, what do these things represent? What is this olive tree on either side and this candlestick? What is that about? So I think to understand this, you're first going to have to try to understand, what is the candlestick? What did the candlestick there that's physically there represent concerning the heavenly tabernacle? And to do that, you'd have to look at where you actually get an answer to that, which is in Revelation. So while you hold a place, if you're turning with me in your Bible, in Zechariah, because we'll come back, let's jump back to Revelation real quick. This time, Revelation chapter number 4. Revelation chapter 4, verse number 5 says, "And out of the throne proceeded lightnings and thunderings and a voice, and there were 7 lamps of fire burning before the throne, which are the 7 spirits of God." Now, hold your place with that, or hold that thought, and we'll jump over to chapter 5. Chapter 5, verse number 6. "And I beheld, and lo, in the midst of the throne and of the 4 beasts, and in the midst of the elders, stood a lamb slain, as it had been slain. Stood a lamb as it had been slain, having 7 horns, 7 eyes, which are the 7 spirits sent forth to all the earth." So you have being identified that the lamp with the 7 candlesticks on it is in heaven a representation of 7 spirits of God. Now, this is something that a lot of people debate. So if you stay with me in the thought for just a moment, I'll give you my quick opinion on this. Honestly, this could have been a whole separate Bible study all by itself, but I can give you a quick answer. So I'll give you a quick answer. Maybe another time we can do a deeper study. But to be honest, this is, I think, pretty definitive. I will say this. A lot of people have different opinions, and a lot of people will disagree with me, and that's fine. But what I see is this. Each of these things we're reading, the 7 eyes, the 7 horns, the 7 spirits, represent the 3 attributes we typically associate with God in terms of omnipotence, omnipresence, and omniscience. The reason I say that is because the 7 spirits are noted, if you think back to what we just read, as going into all the earth. So we just read that in Revelation 5:6, which are the 7 spirits of God sent forth into all the earth. Now, the thing that I'll note is, and this is where a deeper study would profit, because I actually have quite a bit of notes on this, is that when you look at the eyes of God and the presence of God, they're very much linked and associated throughout the Bible. And the same thing with his omniscience and his omnipresence, they're very much linked and associated throughout the Bible. That because God is not limited to space or time, but he exists throughout all time and throughout all space, so that he inhabits eternity. He sees and knows all from the end, from the beginning, and so forth, so that God's omniscient, knowing where things are going to go, knowing what's going on. Nothing is hid from him. David says, "Can I go to hell? Can I go here? Can I go there and escape from your presence?" No. And because you cannot escape from his presence, you can't escape from his knowledge, and so forth. There's a link between the two. I'm not saying one is entirely dependent upon the other, but there's a link between them, that God connects those 2 ideas. When it comes to the horns, I think that I have a good verse to show you that is definitely a reference to his omnipotence, to his power to move and shape the earth according to his will. And that would be Deuteronomy 33, verse 17. So Deuteronomy 33 and verse 17, speaking about God, says his horns are like the unicorns. With them he shall push the nations as he will. And so he's explaining that God, through his horns, or his power, which you understand, horns throughout Revelation and other places tend to represent authorities, powers, kings, and so forth. So it's not a stretch to say that it represents God's power and his rule over kings and all this stuff. So God pushing these things as he will. He uses his horns, this representation, because the seven represents complete or perfect. That's why I feel like it's a representation of omnipotence. It's not a limited power, it's complete and perfect power. The seven eyes represent omniscience. He sees all the earth, and you have so much about that in the Bible. That's the easiest one to define because the Bible says so much about it. That he sees all the things, the end from the beginning, and all the earth, and so forth, so that it's not just a partial, wisdom or knowing. It's an omniscience. And then also when it comes to his presence, God is all present. There's nowhere you can escape from his presence. And so that's what you get with the seven spirits. So there's a lot of debate. I know a lot. I know most of the other answers people give as to what they believe the seven spirits represent. But I'm trying to rush through it because that's not actually my lesson. It's just relevant to understanding what we're getting ready to look at in Zechariah. That the candlestick in Zechariah and the one that's there in the temple, tabernacle, so forth, does not represent what a lot of people tend to think. Because even, for example, uh, Matthew Henry, I think he believes it represents the church. And there's a lot of problems I could raise with that. I just don't really, I don't find a way to even begin to reconcile that with what the Bible would have it to be. Because if it was alone, if there was just a candlestick, and then in heaven you didn't have have something that is, you're told the candlestick represents, which we're told it represents the seven spirits. It is the seven spirits. Then you could probably try to say it's the church, but then you're saying the church is the seven spirits and so forth. So that's why I said it has to work. It has to, all the pieces of the puzzle have to fit. And so for a man as intelligent as he was, I think he definitely missed the ball on that one. But anyways, I think what we're seeing is that it has to represent some facet of who God is when we talk about the candlesticks, the spirits, and the horns, because they're definitely associated with God. It says Jesus, as the Lamb, has the seven horns, has the seven eyes, and the seven spirits. We're told in Revelation 4 that the seven spirits are the lamp with the seven branches on it, and so forth. So what I'm saying through all of that is I believe it has to represent something about the power of God and so forth. When we talk about those things, specifically the seven spirits representing God's presence, his omnipresence. And so what that would then mean when we're talking about these two olive trees is that one is on the right side of this thing that represents the presence of God, and the other is on the left side of the thing that represents the presence of God. And if we continue reading, I think the context directly says that, because it says in verse 14 that they stand by the Lord of the whole earth. So I think that that's exactly, I guess there's a shorter way to show you that, but I wanted you to see it in terms of how the Bible defines these things, how the prophecy sets it, instead of just trying to force you to see it. So let me read that latter part of Zechariah 4, because I said I would do that, verse 12 through verse 14. It says, "And I answered again and said unto him, What be these two olive branches, which through the golden pipes empty the golden oil out of themselves? And he answered and said, Knowest thou not what these be? And I said, No, my Lord. Then said he, These are the two anointed ones that stand by the Lord of the whole earth." Which brings us to our first clue as to who they are, and that is that they are two anointed candlesticks or preachers. So two anointed messengers who stand before the Lord of the whole earth. Now, here's why I did the hard work of trying to show you that it matters how you interpret what is what. At the time of that prophecy, he's saying these two messengers stand before God in heaven, because the olive branch and the candlestick and the temple are only representatives of what's going on in heaven. So the people he's talking about would have to be people who at this point have gone on to heaven. That's going to be one of my main points as to why I believe it's actually Moses and Elijah, not just someone coming in the spirit and power of Moses and Elijah, because of the fact that he's saying these are people who at the time of the prophecy, and the reason why these things are in the temple and tabernacle and so forth are because they're representing the fact that these two people stand before God in heaven. And so you could work around that. If you want to still try to fit it the other way, you can make it fit, I guess. But the easiest answer, the one that goes most clear, I think, with what the Bible's teaching up to this point, is that they are standing before God in heaven as we speak, to be honest. That it's not until they come down to preach that something is going to change. Now, going back to our text of Revelation 11, let's see, verse number 5 this time. I said we go verse by verse. So, verse 5 and verse 6. Then the angel that talked with me answered and said unto me, Knowest thou not what these be? I'm sorry, I'm still in Zechariah. I didn't switch my passage here. Revelation 11, verse number 5 and 6. And if any man will hurt them, fire proceedeth out of their mouth and devoureth their enemies. And if any man will hurt them, he must in this manner be killed. So I'm going to admit that one doesn't seem to be as much a clue as just a description of something that they do. However, the other thing that they do, which is in verse 6, seems to be more of a clue as to who they are. And it says this, these have power to shut heaven, that it rain not in the days of their prophecy, and have power over waters to turn them to blood, and to smite the earth with all plagues as often as they will. So one thing you just have to notice up front about them is the fact that they very much have miracles that associate them to Moses and Elijah. And this is just a matter of being a Bible believer. And I'm not trying to criticize or attack you if you still hold on to Enoch or one of these other things. It's just that when we look at the Bible, God doesn't make connections by accident. He doesn't accidentally give somebody a power that is associated with Moses and then draw your attention to something that's associated with Moses because he wants you to think of Enoch. God is very focused in what he does in his word. Everything is there with a purpose. It's carefully, intricately put together so that everything's directing you to the right point. I mean, for example, the stuff about the olive branches. If you were just reading Revelation 11 and you didn't have the olive branch terminology to connect you back to Zechariah, and you didn't just happen to automatically know that, then it would be hard for you to ever connect that. But because if you've studied Zechariah or if you use a word search or any of that kind of stuff, those two olive branches are a unique terminology. It's going to draw you right back to Zechariah. God very much does that with his word, and he very much does it on purpose. And so because God does that on purpose, you can know that these men do miracles that anyone who reads this is going to be like, oh, hey, Moses did that, or oh, hey, Elijah did that. That God doesn't have that by accident. God could have given them any power to do anything else in the world. I mean, the fact that they're breathing fire shows you that. In fact, if anything, the relevance of them breathing fire is to show you that God could have given them any power he wanted to. He could have had them zap people with lightning if that's what he wanted to do. But they do something that is associated with two very unique characters in the Bible. And it's meant to draw our attention back to those men. Now, this doesn't really define whether it is Moses and Elijah or whether it's in the spirit of, but it does definitely point us back to them to show that you should throw out any other possible choices. It has to be one of those two things, either in the spirit of or it's them directly. Because we know of Elijah, and of course you can go back and read it in the Old Testament. I wrote down James 5:17, where it talks about that he prayed and he stopped the rain for 3.5 years. We just read in verse 6 of Revelation 11, these have power to shut heaven, that it rain not in the days of their prophecy, and have power over waters to turn them to blood. Well, that's exactly what Moses does in Exodus 7, verse 14 to verse 25. And then following that, you have the other plagues. And he says, and to smite the earth with all plagues as often as they will. So God doesn't draw our attention to Moses and Elijah on accident. He doesn't do it by mistake. He does it on purpose. He very specifically gives them things that they have had the ability to do in the past. He gives that back to them because he wants Israel and us as Bible interpreters, Israel, the people who are going to be the recipients of what's going on in this time, the people to whom these people are preaching as they're standing there in Jerusalem, to think back to Moses and Elijah. It's done on purpose. It's to point them back to who they're supposed to be looking to. Which is why I bring this up, because it brings me to what is really my next point, for which we'll jump all the way back to Malachi chapter number 4. So Malachi chapter number 4, I'm going to read, it's a short chapter. I'm going to read all of it. It says, For behold, the day cometh that shall burn as an oven, and all the proud, yea, and all that do wickedly shall be stubble. And the day that cometh shall burn them up, saith the Lord of hosts, and it shall leave them neither root nor branch. But unto you that fear my name shall the Son of Righteousness arise with healing in his wings, and ye shall go forth and grow up as calves of the stall. and you shall tread down the wicked, for they shall be ashes under the soles of your feet in the day that I shall do this, saith the Lord of hosts. Remember ye the law of Moses my servant, which I commanded unto him in Horeb, for all Israel, with the statutes and judgments. Behold, I will send you Elijah the prophet before the coming of the great and dreadful day of the Lord. And he shall turn the hearts of the fathers to the children, and the hearts of the children to their fathers, lest I come and smite the earth with a curse. So let's understand this for a moment. One of the biggest issues I think people have in trying to decide, is it in the spirit and power or is it actually Elijah, is because of John the Baptist. And we've just done a Bible study on this in our East Belgian Bible study. So thankfully I have a little bit of notes to pull from that, or just some thoughts to pull in from that. That when you study out everything the Bible says about John the Baptist, it comes very clear that John the Baptist was someone who came in the spirit and power of Elijah. And the reason you can come to that conclusion is because literally when the angel comes to his parents and tells him, that's what he tells them, is he's going to come in the spirit and power of Elijah. I'll read it to you in Luke 1:17. Luke chapter 1 and verse number 17 says, and he shall go before him in the spirit and power of Elias, to turn the hearts of the fathers to the children, and the disobedient to the wisdom of the just, to make ready a people for the Lord. Now, the reason why there's controversy about this is because there's several statements that Jesus makes that, if misunderstood, would lead you to believe that John is actually Elijah, like the Elijah from the Old Testament, not a type or picture of Elijah. However, if you read what was just said, it's he'll go before him in the spirit and power of Elijah. Not that he is Elijah, but he's going forward in the spirit and power. Now, I will give you one of those verses that people often cling to and like, okay, he's actually Elijah. And I'm sorry, it looks like I didn't write that down, but I would think it's probably in Matthew 17 after the Mount of Transfiguration, I would guess. But when you look at the prophecies concerning Elijah and John the Baptist, and you look at the statements that are being made, one is that in Malachi, you actually have the prophecy of John the Baptist outside of the prophecy of Elijah. So Elijah is Malachi chapter 4, and we're told that he's going to come before the great and dreadful day of the Lord. The prophecy that is John the Baptist, and it's one that the Bible says it in a way where there can be no mistake, is actually Malachi chapter number 3 and verse number 1. Behold, I will send my messenger, and he will prepare the way before me, and the Lord whom ye seek shall suddenly come to his temple, even the messenger of the covenant whom ye delight in. Behold, he shall come, saith the Lord of hosts. So the messenger who's going to come and make straight the way of the Lord is Malachi 3, also Isaiah, where it says the voice crying in the wilderness. John specifically says that's who he is. He's the voice crying in the wilderness, make ye straight the way of the Lord. So there is Old Testament prophecy concerning John the Baptist and his coming, but it's not to be mistaken for Malachi chapter 4. Now, because I did something dumb and I didn't write down some of these notes, let me run you through these thoughts quickly. The problem is that Jesus, for at one point, says that if you had been willing, this could have been John. This could have been Elijah to you. And what he's saying to the Pharisees at that point is that they're criticizing him because they say, well, the Messiah is going to do great miracles and open the eyes of the blind. He's going to take away the kingdoms and all this stuff, and he's going to be preceded by Elijah. And Jesus says, well, if you actually really believed that, then you would believe that John was Elijah, and you would see me opening the eyes of the blind, and you would believe that I'm the Messiah. You don't really believe that. And so he's not actually saying that he is Elijah. He's saying that if you really believed it, then you would have thought that this was Elijah. This is who he would have been to you. The other one is, and this is one of the more important, that's why I regret that I don't have this, and maybe I can find it real quick, but is when he says that Elias. This is the one that, if you don't pay close attention, would seem to say that it is that he is Elijah. This is the one that you have to pay attention, because one word can make all the difference. One word it is Matthew 17, like I thought. One word can change everything about a passage. And it says, and his disciples asked him, saying, Why then shall the scribes and Elias must, I'm just realizing, I think I did write it down. It's just in my notes for another portion of what I wanted to talk about. Okay, so Matthew 17, verse 10, his disciples ask him, why then say the scribes that Elias must first come? And Jesus answered and said unto them, Elias truly shall first come and restore all things. But I say unto you that, and you notice if you have your King James Bible out in front of you, that is capitalized. That Elias is come already, and they knew him not, but have done unto him whatsoever they listed. Likewise shall also the Son of Man suffer of them. Then the disciples understood that he spake of John the Baptist. But you notice that he's saying that there are two different Elijahs by saying that Elijah. So he's saying this is not the Elijah, this is that Elijah, that type of Elijah, that one who's coming as an Elijah. So Jesus doesn't say that he's actually Elijah. He's saying that he is a Elijah by saying that one instead of saying the. There's a difference between that one and the. When you say that one, you're indicating that there's more than one. If you say a Elijah, you're indicating that there's more than one. If he had said the, or if he had just said Elijah, then it would have meant he was the actual Elijah. The fact that he says that Elijah indicates that there's more than one Elijah in this. And he's saying, that one came already and they did what they wanted to him. And just like they killed him, they're also going to kill the Son of Man. So my point is that there's actually a very simple answer to this when you study it through. And really it's just a matter of reading the Bible as it is and paying attention to what it's saying instead of trying to read stuff into it. And when you do that, you'll come to the conclusion that we should have reached easily, because reincarnation is not in the Bible. And John the Baptist, we know his story. We know what he was like in the womb all the way to his adulthood and his death. So we know that he didn't just come back from heaven. He wasn't just resurrected. He wasn't just set down to preach. He was actually a person who was born out of a womb of his mother, and that's reincarnation. And if you believe that he was actually Elijah, then you're adding a doctrine from a whole nother religion in your Bible that doesn't exist in the Bible. Reincarnation is not a Christian nor biblical idea. It is a Hindu idea. And the Bible in no way indicates John the Baptist as being the reincarnated Elijah. When you look at it in those terms, you realize, oh, wait, yeah, that is ridiculous. It's a little hard to defend that. So the actual answer is the one that is actually the easiest to get to when you just look at what the words are saying. And that is that he is not the Elijah, he is that Elijah. He is someone who's coming in the spirit and power, a type of Elijah who's there to preach. Now, where that then comes into the discussion is that's actually what makes it complicated, is because you could take that same exact argument and apply it to the Elijah of Revelation 11 and say, okay, that's just another that Elijah. That's just another Elijah. And that at this point, there's three of them. There's the actual one, the John the Baptist one, and the Revelation 11 one. You could do that. But you notice it's getting complicated at that point. The reality is that everybody throughout your New Testament believed that the actual Elijah was going to come back. And that's why it was confusing to them with John the Baptist, because they also realized that reincarnation is not biblical. And John the Baptist has a mother and father. He was born in this world. And it's confusing. And same thing with Jesus. They're like, well, some people say he's Elijah, but people are realizing, well, that doesn't make sense. But everybody is expecting the actual Elijah to come back, because the prophecy of Malachi 4 is that Elijah will come back. And so this is a principle that I think we should always read our Bible with. And you have to be careful, I understand, because you could even make a mistake doing it this way. But I always encourage you, when you're reading a passage, to read it and ask yourself, if I didn't have any outside opinions, if I didn't have some preset doctrine that I'm trying to fit the Bible into, if I wasn't part of some camp or some movement or whatever, if I just read this passage without anybody telling me what to believe about it, what would I believe? And if you just read Malachi chapter 4 without anybody telling you what to believe about it, you'd say, hey, that's Elijah. If you read Revelation 11 without anybody telling you what to think about it, you'd say, well, that sounds a lot like Elijah. I think that might be Elijah. He didn't really even die, right? He was just taken up into heaven. My point is that if nobody was telling you what to do, you would come to a conclusion that that's actually Elijah. Now, the only reason this is one that I will defend if you still stand on the other side and say it's a type is because of John the Baptist, because John the Baptist was not actual Elijah. He was a Elijah. He was that Elijah, a type of Elijah. But if you look at it, the way the people who grew up, studying these things, who believed it, the way they had come to the conclusion on this all throughout, coming up to this point, if you're looking at what is being preached up to this point, if you're looking at what seems to be being indicated by certain events that we haven't got to yet, is that the actual Elijah is expected to come back, not somebody just coming in the type and spirit like John the Baptist did. John the Baptist was supposed to be a picture of the actual Elijah coming back at the end times. That's what, in fact, to be honest, if this one is a type, it robs a little bit away of John the Baptist, because John the Baptist is supposed to be a picture who represents at Christ's first coming what the actual Elijah will do at Christ's second coming, which is to come and make straight the way of the Lord, because he's actually going to turn the hearts of the people back. John the Baptist could not fulfill that prophecy because he didn't actually turn the hearts of the people. He turned some people back. The actual Elijah is said to come back and truly make straight, actually turn the hearts of the people back to God, that Israel's going to turn back to God because of him. So John the Baptist couldn't even fulfill the prophecy concerning who Elijah is. He's supposed to be a picture or a representation of what's going to happen when the real Elijah comes back. Now, then, concerning Moses, the answer goes back to Deuteronomy 33, and this is the other one that actually makes it a little bit more complicated, and that's why I focused on Elijah first, is because Elijah's got a little more context, a little more stuff that we can measure and weigh to try to come to an answer, whereas with this one, this is one that can be a little bit complicated. So, because it would actually seem on the surface as if he's saying it's not the actual Moses, it's somebody like Moses. And that's why you have to come to a conclusion about what you believe first and then come into this passage. Whereas I will say, if you use the principle I just gave you to read it, you would probably walk away from this one saying that I think it's probably somebody coming like in the spirit of Moses. And that's the other reason. In fact, to be honest, this is the reason why I still say I allow and understand why somebody would walk out saying, okay, I think it's a type, is this passage. This is the primary argument. If I was going to argue that side, this would be my passage I would argue it from. Deuteronomy 18 and verse 15. And the Lord thy God will raise up unto thee a prophet from the midst of thee, of thy brethren, like unto me. Unto him ye shall hearken, according to all that thou desirest of the Lord thy God in Horeb, in the day of the assembly, saying, Let me not hear again the voice of the Lord my God, neither let me see this great fire or more, that I die not. And the Lord said unto me, They that have well spoken that which they have spoken, I will rise up a prophet from among their brethren, like unto thee, talking about Moses, and will put my words in his mouth, and he shall speak unto them all that I command him. And it shall come to pass that whosoever will not hearken unto my words, which he shall speak in my name, I will require it of him. So here's what I want you to notice. The Jews were always looking for not only Elijah to come back, but a prophet like Moses. And that's where I say there is a great argument to be made out of this passage for a type as opposed to the literal. I still feel that it doesn't negate the literal because of the fact that you see all the stuff with John the Baptist, that doesn't negate the literal. Instead, it only strengthens it. And so the language could very easily negate it, but I don't feel personally. My conviction after having studied this through is I still believe it to be Moses, because the other one is Elijah, and it makes sense that if the other one's Elijah, then it would actually be Moses based off of some other stuff, because I'm not done yet. I mean, if this was the end of my argument, I don't think I would have convinced you of anything. But I want to give you one other verse in John 1. I almost started to read this a minute ago, but John 1 in verse 21, I don't think I read this. And they ask him, What then? Art thou Elias? And this is when people are asking John the Baptist who he is. What then? Art thou Elias? And he said, I am not. Art thou that prophet? So you see, they know that there's supposed to be a prophet who's coming back to make straight and prepare everyone's hearts for Christ at his second coming. They know that. They understand when he's coming to be the king, that Elijah and a prophet are going to come. And you'll notice very similarly when Jesus is asking, who do people say that I am? That some say you're Elijah, some say you're that prophet. You notice that there's this understanding throughout all of Israel that there has to be the two, Elijah and the prophet. So that's why at his first coming, you also see that these prophecies are not fulfilled, that it's something different, and that John the Baptist is not the actual Elijah and so forth, because the fact it also would have had to require that there was a prophet who rose up like Moses or actual Moses, either way, out of the people uh, to uh, to preach to them in preparation for the last days, and that's what they're looking for. Now, what we then have, and this is, I'm getting close to the end, so don't worry, because I know we're running long on time. Like I said, it's a lot to try to fit in. Matthew 17 and verse 1 says, "And after 6 days, Jesus taketh Peter, James, and John, his brother, and bringeth them up an high mountain apart, and was transfigured before them, and his face did shine as the sun, and his raiment was white as the light. And behold, there appeared unto him Moses and Elijah talking with him." So Moses and Elijah coming back and being significant is one seems to be what's prophesied throughout the Old Testament. Like I say, Moses is a little more difficult, but Elijah seems to be pretty straight that it's prophesied that he's coming back. Two, it's something that we already see it. We've already seen on the Mount of Transfiguration that they came back for a significant purpose there before Christ went to the cross. So you have that as well. But then the other side of this is what they represent. And what I mean by that, I would give this example. One is Israel was already looking for them. And they were saying, and almost it's like the idea is, okay, if Moses and Elijah come, that prophet and Elijah come, then okay, we'll listen. Whatever God has to say, we'll listen to it. We'll buy into it. We'll eat it up. We'll listen to it. But think about Luke chapter 16, verse 29 through verse 31, wherein you have the rich man who's in hell and he's saying, I have the 5 brothers. Please send Lazarus back to go preach to them. And Abraham looks to him and says, they have Moses and the prophets. If they'll not believe one of them, they'll not believe such as one who's come back from the dead. To let them believe Moses and the prophets. Moses represents the law. That's why when Jesus says all the law and prophets can be hung on 2 nails, the law is represented by Moses. Who is the prophet who represents the prophets? It's Elijah. Well, what is that? That's your Old Testament. Your Old Testament is typically broken down into those 2 statements, the law and the prophets, Moses and Elijah. Moses being the chief in terms of representing the law, Elijah being the chief in terms of representing the prophets. It's not that he's the only prophet, it's that he is the one who represents the rest of them when you're looking at the way God defines stuff. He is that pinnacle of all of that. And so the reason why it's significant that it actually be them is because, one, the Jews are looking for it. So it's important in terms of waking them up. 2, it's already been set and prophesied and seems to be going in that direction. And 3, God said if they're not going to believe Moses and Elijah, and they're not going to believe the law and the prophets, or Moses and the prophets, as it said there, they're not going to believe any other miracles. They need to be turned by believing Moses and the prophets. And who's going to represent the prophets better than Elijah? And he's the one that's least debatable about who's there preaching anyways. So there's not really any room to argue him. You'd be easier to argue that Moses is not there. But that statement shows us that Moses and Elijah are necessary into turning back the hearts of the Jews and helping to wake them up. So my evidences then would be this, that when considering who they are, those 2 olive branches have to be 2 anointed preachers or prophets who have stood in the presence of God in heaven. Because the physical things that were in the temple or tabernacle are representations of what's in heaven. And we're told that the olive branches there represent the actual people standing before God in heaven. So it would make more sense logically based off of that it has to be someone who has died and went to heaven or was carried to heaven or something of that nature, who God is going to raise up and bring back to preach in the last days. So it would make more sense based off of that it's a person who's in heaven right now as opposed to someone who has yet to be born, which is what it would be if it's somebody coming in spirit and power like John the Baptist did. 2, we know it has to be them, or at least somebody connected to them, because of the miracles and the things that are showing there to point us to them. God points us to Moses and Elijah over and over again when it comes to these 2 witnesses. He doesn't point us to anybody but them, really. 3, you have the fact that Israel is looking for them because of all the Old Testament prophecies, because of the fact that you have the prophecy saying that Elijah is coming and there's going to rise up a prophet like Moses, which again, knowing the way it's written, could read as Moses himself coming back, that he's going to be raised up from the dead to do this, especially when you study what it means for John the Baptist to be a type of Elijah. When you look at that and study that through, you'll see that it very much fits for it to be Moses. I do understand if that passage is your hang up and keeps you on the type or figure. I'm not going to be upset about that. But you do see that the language, the study, seeing how God uses and talks about these things, that it very much fits for it to be the actual Moses and the actual Elijah. And then for the significance of what they mean to Israel. That these are the things that God says, if they'll come and preach to Israel, then Israel's hearts will be turned, or can't. This is what's necessary to turn them back. The miracles and stuff are not going to turn them in the way that Moses and Elijah would. That he says before his coming, Moses and Elijah are going to come and preach, and that the people's hearts will be turned then. That even John the Baptist was just a picture of how this is going to look when Moses and Elijah actually come and do it. So my evidences then are that, and I leave you at that point to give your vote, your opinion on it, because that's what we do with Unique Insights in Bible Prophecy. Is you get to give us a grade to see whether we actually convinced you or not. And so the grading system is like this: if you were convinced, leave a comment, tell us that you were that it's sound doctrine, that you see this as sound doctrine. If you see it, but let's say you're still leaning to that side of, well, I think maybe that I don't fully buy into it actually being them. I still lean a little bit in another direction. Then you can put almost persuaded. If you're just not really sure, you're on the fence, and you're not convinced in any direction of it, of what I'm saying, then put unsure. And then if you disagree with me, you still hold strong to another idea about this, then comment with unconvinced. If I didn't convince you, you're unconvinced. If you're unsure, you're unsure. And if you're almost there, like you see it, but you're just not really willing to bite into it, you're almost persuaded. And if you agree, then leave us a comment of sound doctrine. But I encourage everybody to leave their grade for this. That's the way I like for this to be done. That way you have a chance to contribute and be a part of this. I also encourage you, if you have questions about prophecy, please be sure to leave those, because it will help me. It'll help me to actually answer questions you want to know. Because yes, I love going in and doing studies like these and deep dives into certain things that we know very well, but it helps me when I know what you want to know about prophecy. So if you have questions about prophecy, leave those in the comments. Also, if you've enjoyed the study, leave an amen in the comments too. Go ahead and fill up my comments now. Give the grades, give all that stuff. I'd appreciate that. And so let me also say this, that not only would I ask you to leave the comments, but I try to get better about promoting these ministries and asking you that you subscribe, you like, you share, whatever all you can do, whatever you can click, except for unsubscribe. Go ahead and do those things. Even if you give a dislike, I don't care, because YouTube still promotes it if you dislike it. So if you would do that, I would appreciate it, as it helps the videos and the messages get out to more people. It helps to make more fruit of the time that's put into these things. And so I appreciate you being here to be part of the study with us. I hope it's been a help to you. I hope I answered your questions. Maybe if you still have some questions, you're welcome to ask those in the comments, especially if there was something in this study that you felt like you would like to hear more about that I didn't go deep enough into. Let me know that as well. That way, again, I know next time I do one of these, which is every month I do a study in prophecy like this, I know where I need to go, what I need to cover more. So anyways, we'll get ready to close this out. I hope it's been a help to you. Be sure to give me some feedback. Let me know what you want more information on and so forth. Maybe there's more you want to know about these prophets and so forth. If so, just let me know that, so I can know where to take the next step in the lesson. I thank you all again for being a part of it. It was a good number of people commenting and contributing, some friends of mine and all. I appreciate that. And we hope to see all of our people in God's house tomorrow. So hopefully you'll be able to be in church with us. We have at least one exciting thing going on in the service that I hope will be a help to you. All right, let's go ahead and close out the live stream then.